Welcome back to Plato's Republic. If you made it this far, pat yourself on the back because you are now 3/4 of the way through. I'm so proud of you. If you did not make it this far, get out of here. Actually, check the video description. I'll have a link to the full playlist. Book 8 is what we're in the middle of right now. And the beginning of Book 8, we started talking about the different types of government. So we're kind of picking up this thread that we abandoned in Book 5, where Socrates is like, oh, there are 5 types of government. Here are 2 of them, and now I'm going to talk about epistemology and the allegory of the cave for a little while. And so now he's finally enumerating the different types of government, and he's showing how they evolve into each other. So he starts out with the aristocracy, so rule by the best or the nobility, and that's kind of his ideal city. And we've also gotten to know the ideal man or woman that is ruled by justice, or at least this idea of justice that includes the rational element, spirited element, keeping the appetites under control. And he makes this really arcane argument for why the aristocracy can't last forever. Well, his first argument is that because it comes to be, it must necessarily decay, because it's not an eternal thing. But then he makes this very, very, very specific, fake mathematical, maybe numerological argument, where he spends an entire page doing this calculation of this square and this oblong shape, and the footnote sheds some light on it, saying there are this many opportunities for things to happen, and something to do with the fertility rates. Honestly, I still don't understand exactly what he's getting at there, but it did come down to fertility and infertility, and man's inability to plan those cycles properly. So what happens is, my interpretation is you get some kind of demographic pattern, or baby boom or baby bust, and then people don't get the education that they need in order to become good leaders. They need that musical and physical education that we talked about in book 3 or 4. And then you have mismanagement, and then society starts to become something else. So you have people who are seeking after honors when they shouldn't be, because they're not truly just people. And so that, as a result, you get this timocracy, which is this rule by people who love honors. And he says that's kind of the Spartan model or the Cretan model. And then from there, the people who love honors, when they're in charge of the city, they start to spend money. And so they come to love money. And they change the laws to allow themselves to have money. So remember, originally the Guardians weren't allowed to own any gold. We had this myth about how they have spiritual gold in them, and that shouldn't mix with mortal gold. Just sort of a complex explanation for why they need to keep their hands out of the cookie jar. But this timocracy devolves into oligarchy, which is the rule by the rich. And so the oligarchy starts to impose requirements saying you must have this much money in order to have a vote in our society. And he says that ultimately you get kind of the ultra wealthy and the ultra poor in the oligarchy, and then the poor either become beggars or they turn to evil, like temple robbing and pickpocketing and thieving. And that's kind of where we left the thread on the society side. He has a parallel argument for how the kind of same pattern occurs in individuals. So you can start with the just person, and then, or maybe it's over here. So you start with the just man, and then I guess his kid becomes the. No. Okay, so the just man is kind of a pushover. That's right. And his wife starts complaining about him to his kid. He's like, yeah, your father, he's a good man, but everybody's taking advantage of him. He should be suing these people, and he's not. He should be running for office, but he's not. He's just too content with himself and his life. And I ain't pleased with the situation. I want a strong man who will be more recognized in the community and make more money. And so the son listens to her and also listens to the servants and gets some ideas. He says, okay, I want to not be like my dad, but I kind of want to be like my dad. So I'm not going to be ruled by my appetites. I'm going to be ruled by my spirited element, in parallel to the Timocracy. And so, as his story plays out, this guy grows up and he just seeks all kinds of public offices and honors, but he gets ahead of himself and ultimately, and I guess it backfires, and the community either executes him or takes away all of his things because he becomes this like overly proud general or something like that. And so his kid, so now the grandson sees that. He's like, I don't want to be like dad who's just stripped of all his money. Like, I just want money. And so, yeah, so the kid like grows up in poverty and he's just like, all right, I don't want to ever lack for money like my dad. So I'm just going to dedicate myself to making money and not spending it. And so this kid's the parallel to the oligarchy. And I thought it was funny because he doesn't actually want to he doesn't want to spend the money ever. Just like the oligarchs, they're too cheap to hire mercenaries. So I think that's why they're going to get taken over eventually. But this guy is also just extremely cheap. Like, he doesn't actually want to go out and spend money on luxuries. And in fact, he is afraid that if he becomes an athlete, okay, this is his big fear about becoming an athlete. He thinks he might be successful, and then he'll just start spending money. So he'll like turn to, he's like sees all these celebrities turning to like drugs and alcohol and high living and partying at the clubs and then going broke. And he's like, I don't want any of that. Like, I just want to make sure I have my money. So it's better just to like lose at the Olympics than to get the gold medal and let it get to my head and then lose all my stuff. So I really love that. It just made that person a very interesting character to me. So, all right, so we've been kind of going down the ladder. Aristocracy, Timocracy, oligarchy, and now we're going to go to democracy and tyranny. So those are the last two that I think we're gonna cover here. I think in book 8, although maybe it'll spill over into book 9. Okay, so let's pick the thread back up. We just got to the end of oligarchy, and I think it's going to devolve into democracy. So we'll see how that happens exactly. Okay, so Socrates says, well then, isn't the change from an oligarchy to a democracy due in some way or other to the insatiable desire for the good set before it, the need to become as rich as possible? Adeimantus, how so? Since the rulers rule in it because they own a lot, I suppose they are not willing to enact laws to prevent young people who have become intemperate from spending and wasting their wealth, so that by buying and making loans on the property of such people, the rulers themselves can become even richer and more honored. Okay, so, yeah, so it's kind of like they allow like high-interest payday loans, or like loan sharking, and predatory loans are completely allowed. Like, oh, yeah, you young people, don't spend all that money, but they actually like it because it makes them just even richer. Okay. Adeimantus, that's their primary goal at any rate. Socrates, so, isn't it clear by now that you cannot honor wealth in the city and maintain temperance in the citizens at the same time, but must inevitably neglect one or the other? So we're either going to neglect wealth or neglect temperance. Okay, that is pretty clear. Socrates, the negligent encouragement of intemperance in oligarchies, then, sometimes reduces people who are not ill-born to poverty. Okay, so I guess you got people already born in poverty, and then because it's kind of this licentious society which just benefits the rich. I think it's like Potterville in It's a Wonderful Life. It just, all these people who would have these nice middle-class lives are reduced to poverty because they just find the demon liquor and go gamble at Mr. Potter's casino. Adeimantus, indeed it does. Socrates, and these people sit around in the city, I suppose, armed with stings or weapons, some of them in debt, some disenfranchised, some both, hating and plotting against those who have acquired their property, and all the others as well, passionately longing for revolution. I'd believe it. You got a society with extreme wealth inequality, like all these unemployed people, just brooding. Adimantus, that's right. Socrates, these money makers, with their heads down, pretending not to see them. I'm going to look up heads down, because it's just like a weird thing to put a note on. Their heads are down because their appetite for money forces their souls to look downward. Inject the poison of their money into any of the rest who do not resist, and, carrying away a multitude of offspring in interest from their principal, greatly increase the size of the drone and beggar class in the city. Okay, they just use predatory loans to make everybody dead broke. Adimantus, they certainly do increase it greatly. Socrates, in any case, they are not willing to quench evil of this sort as it flares up, either by preventing a person from doing whatever he likes with his own property, or alternatively, by passing this other law to do away with such abuses. Okay, so I think he's saying, you could pass a law that, like, prevented predatory loans, but that would prevent a person from doing what they want with their own property. Or, I'm not sure what the other law is. We'll keep going. Adimantus, what law? Socrates, the one that is next best, and that compels the citizens to care about virtue. I don't think that works. You can't just pass a law saying everyone must care about virtue starting tomorrow. You see, if someone prescribed that most voluntary contracts be entered into at the lender's own risk, money would be less shamelessly pursued in the city, and fewer of those evils we were mentioning just now would develop in it. Okay, so it's, if they prescribe the contracts must be at the lender's own risk. So I think that means if you default on your loan, then they can't recover it. You're like, oh yeah, sorry, kind of like the housing crisis, 2007. Like, oh, whoops, house is underwater, bye, here are the keys, I'm taking all the piping. Adimantus, far fewer. Socrates, but as it is, and for all these reasons, the rulers in the city treat their subjects in the way we described. And as for themselves and those belonging to them, don't they bring up to the young to be fond of luxury, incapable of effort either mental or physical, too soft to endure pleasures or pains, and lazy? Yeah, those darn rich kids. They don't know the value of hard work. Adimantus, of course. And haven't they themselves neglected everything except making money and been no more concerned about virtue than poor people are? Adimantus, yes, they have. Socrates, and when rulers and subjects, socialized in this way, meet on journeys or some other shared undertakings, whether in an embassy or a military campaign, or as shipmates or fellow soldiers, or when they watch one another in dangerous situations, in these circumstances, don't you think the poor are in no way despised by the rich? On the contrary, don't you think it is often the case that a poor man, lean and suntanned, is stationed in battle next to a rich one, reared in the shade and carrying a lot of excess flesh, and sees him panting and completely at a loss? And don't you think he believes that it is because of the cowardice of the poor that such people are rich, and that one poor man says to another when they meet in private, "These men are ours for the taking. They're good for nothing." This sounds so plausible. Just going into battle, like, yeah, this like rich fat guy who's just panting all the time. What good is he? We can take his stuff. Adimantus, I know very well they do. Socrates, well, just as a sick body needs only a slight shock from outside to become ill and sometimes, even without external influence, becomes divided into factions, itself against itself, doesn't a city, in the same condition, need only a small pretext, such as one side bringing in allies from an oligarchy or the other from a democracy, to become ill and fight with itself? And doesn't it sometimes become divided into factions even without any external influence? Okay. So yeah, this is the old, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And one side, probably the poor people, are going to like either bring in outside help and be like, let's just get rid of these rich people and take all their stuff, because like we're lean and suntanned and they're just fat and worthless. Or they don't even need outside help. Yes, says Adimantus, violently so. Socrates, then democracy comes about, I suppose, when the poor are victorious, kill or expel the others, and give the rest an equal share in the Constitution and the ruling offices, and the majority of offices in it are assigned by lot. Hey, that makes sense. You get the violent revolution, all the poor people are like, yeah, let's get rid of these rich people. Power to the people, one man, one vote. Everybody wins. Assign offices by lot. We're sick of this corruption. Adeimantus. Yes, that is how a democratic political system gets established, whether it comes to exist by force of arms or because intimidation drives its opponents into exile. You know what I'd be really curious about is if Socrates was actually looking at any historical record here for these sorts of transitions. I mean, they make sense in a narrative way. You're like, yeah, I could see that. All these people being mad they don't have any money and they're doing all the work and killing the rich, but I wonder if there's any historical precedent or like one of the neighboring cities that happened in, or even Athens. I don't know. Nope, not going to look that up. Okay. Adeimantus. Yes, that is how a democratic political system gets established, whether it comes to exist by force of arms or because intimidation drives its opponents into exile. Socrates. In what way, then, do these people live? What sort of constitution do they have? For clearly, the sort of man who is like it will turn out to be democratic. Okay, going into the other column now. So we've described how oligarchy descends into violent revolution and the true democracy is established. Let's see, we left the guy who just loved money because he grew up poor and he didn't want to be like his dad. So let's see what his kid does. Adeimantus, clearly. Well, in the first place, aren't they free? And isn't the city full of freedom and freedom of speech? And isn't there license in it to do whatever one wants? That's what they say anyway. And where there is license. That's an interesting way to put that, because here he is in Athens, and you gotta say it's full of freedom and freedom of speech. And then Adeimantus, that's not actually agreement. He's just like, yeah, that's what they say, but really, if you say what you want, then they might actually exile you, or, deplatform you, or whatever. Okay, Socrates. And where there is license, clearly each person would arrange his own life in whatever way pleases him. Adeimantus, clearly. I imagine it is in this constitution, then, that multifarious people come to exist. Okay, we've seen this word multifarious a number of times. I think most prominently it was in reference to the actors, because he's like, okay, in the ideal city, we don't have any of these darn multifarious actors who can imitate lots of people, because we want each person doing one job, and an actor who can pretend to be a lot of different people, that's not that ideal, so we're getting rid of them. We'd rather have one actor who's not very good use like the narrative method rather than the imitative method. And I guess, yeah, multifarious might just be like a Renaissance person who can do lots of different jobs. Adeimantus, of course, Socrates. It looks then as though it is the most beautiful of all the constitutions. For just like an embroidered cloak embroidered with every kind of ornament, it is embroidered with every sort of character, and so would appear to be the most beautiful. And presumably, many people would behave like women and children looking at embroidered objects and actually judge it to be the most beautiful. Okay, it's beautiful, diverse democracy. Adeimantus, they certainly would. What is more, bless you, it is also a handy place in which to look for a constitution. I don't know what that means. Why is that? Socrates, because it contains all kinds of constitutions as a result of its license. So whoever wants to organize a city, as we were doing just now, probably has to go to a democracy and, as if he were in a supermarket of constitutions, pick out whatever pleases him and establish it. Isn't that interesting? So it's like there's so much freedom, you can just invent any kind of government that you want and nobody's going to stop you. Yeah, it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like the theory of the federal system, or what do they call it, laboratories of democracy. It's like the United States, there are a bunch of different states, and like they got different tax rates and different laws about this and regulations. So in some ways you can be like, oh, I'd really like high pensions and taxes, I'll move to Illinois. Or you're like, I really like owning lots of guns, I'll move to Texas. And so you can kind of pick out your political rules in this, this political marketplace. This is a little more specific. Like, I think you can actually, I don't know how you actually, like, go to this city and be like, which one do I want? You. I'll take this one. But it does kind of remind me also of all these, like, I don't know, the late 19th century in the U.S., there was, like, the United States is massive, and they just had all this extra land, and so people could just go kind of start whatever constitutions that they wanted. So they'd have, like, the Oneida community, and they were kind of experimenting with, like, getting rid of marriage and having polygamy in, like, upstate New York, and then they had, like, the Mormons in Missouri, and then out in Utah. So there really was all this kind of, like, experimentation with these communes in a way that you could only do in a democracy, where there's just so much freedom, and, the feds have a hard time getting all the way out to Utah back then. So I don't know, maybe it's like that. Okay, Adeimantus. He probably wouldn't be at a loss for examples anyway. Socrates. There's no compulsion to rule in this city, even if you are qualified to rule, or to be ruled if you do not want to be, or to be at war when the others are at war, or to keep the peace when the others are keeping it, if you do not want peace. Wow, this is a lot of freedom. There's not even a draft. Or even if there happens to be a law preventing you from ruling, or from serving on a jury, to be any the less free to rule or serve on a jury. Isn't that a heavenly and pleasant way to pass the time while it lasts? Okay, so it says, even if there's a law that says you can't serve on a jury, you're like, no, I can do what I want. You can't tell me I can't be on a jury. I'm going to serve on a jury. Like, I'm not going to war. Like, I'm not being peaceful. I'm going to go, if you guys aren't going to attack this other city, I'm going to go by myself. Adeimantus, it probably is, while it lasts. Socrates. And what about the calm of some of their condemned criminals? Isn't that a sophisticated quality? Or have you never seen people who have been condemned to death or exile in a constitution of this sort staying on all the same and living right in the middle of things without anyone giving them a thought or staring at them while they stroll around like a hero? Okay. So I think it's saying, like, you can be convicted of a crime, but they're just like, whatever. He's not bothering anybody. This again kind of reminds me of the Old West, where you had somebody who's, like, wanted for a bunch of bank robberies, and like, feds aren't going to get here. Adeimantus. Yes, I have seen it a lot. Socrates. And what about the city's tolerance? Its complete lack of petty-mindedness. Yeah, Socrates hates petty-mindedness. And its utter disregard for the things we took so seriously when we were founding the city. That unless someone had transcendent natural gifts, he would never become a good man if he did not play fine games right from early childhood and engage in practices that are all of that same sort. Isn't it magnificent how it tramples all that underfoot, gives no thought to what sort of practices someone went in for before he entered politics, and honors them only if he tells them he wishes the majority well? Okay. Adeimantus, that's true nobility. So he's saying, yeah, there's just so much freedom. It's like everybody's homeschooled, you don't have to give your kids vaccinations, you just study whatever you want, and then whoever goes into politics, it's just whoever can just say, like, hey, you guys, the people, I love you. I love all of you. I hope you do great. And they're like, yeah. And no one says, like, oh, wait, has this person actually been to school? Like, do they actually know anything? Or are they just kissing our behinds? Socrates. These, then, and others akin to them, are the characteristics a democracy would possess. And it would, it seems, be a pleasant constitution, lacking rulers but not complexity, and assigning a sort of equality to equals and unequals alike. So maybe that's his qualm with it, is like, not all people are actually equal, so why are we treating them as equals? Yes, that's well known, says Adeimantus. Look and see, then, what sort of private individual resembles it. This is what I like getting into. Or should we first consider, as we did in the case of the Constitution, how he comes to exist? Yes, let's see what his father issues are. Well, doesn't it happen this way? Mightn't we suppose that our thrifty oligarchic man had a son brought up by his father with his father's traits of character? Yes. Then he, too, would rule by force the pleasures that exist in him, the spendthrift ones that do not make money, the ones that are called unnecessary. Okay, so remember, yeah, this oligarchic man, he does have these appetites, But he uses kind of like fear and force to keep him under control, not reason. Adeimantus, clearly. Socrates, in order not to have a discussion in the dark, would you like us first to determine which appetites are necessary and which are not? I would. Well then, wouldn't those we cannot deny rightly be called necessary, and those whose satisfaction benefits us? For we are by nature compelled to try to satisfy them both. Isn't that so? Okay, so, alright, so if the satisfaction of an appetite benefits us, that's a necessary appetite, he's saying. Of course. Socrates, so we would be right to apply the term necessary to them. Adeimantus, we would be right. Socrates, what about those someone could get rid of if he started practicing from childhood, those whose presence does no good, but may even do the opposite? We said that all of them were unnecessary, would we be right? Okay, it's doing you no good, not a necessary appetite, get rid of it. We would be right, says Adeimantus. Let's pick an example of each, so that we have a pattern to follow. Yes, let's. Wouldn't the desire to eat to the point of health and well-being and the desire for bread and relishes be necessary ones? Gotta have those relishes. I suppose so, says Adeimantus. The desire for bread is surely necessary on both counts, in that it is beneficial, and that, unless it is satisfied, we die. Adeimantus, yes. Socrates, and so is the one for relishes, insofar as it is beneficial and conduces to well-being. Indeed. Socrates, what about an appetite that goes beyond these and seeks other sorts of foods, those pastries, that if it is restrained from childhood and educated, most people can get rid of, and that is harmful to the body and harmful to the soul's capacity for wisdom and temperance? Wouldn't it be correct to call it unnecessary? No donuts. No Count Chocula. Adeimantus, entirely correct. Wouldn't we also say that the latter desires are spendthrift, then, whereas the former are money-making because they are useful where work is concerned? Where work is concerned? I don't know what that means. Oh, or maybe it's just like you need bread to have energy to work, so that's a useful one. But you don't need a pastry. That doesn't help you at the office. Adeimantus, certainly. Socrates, and won't we say the same about sexual appetites and the rest? Adeimantus, yes. And didn't we say that the person we just now called a drone is full of such pleasures and appetites and is ruled by the unnecessary ones, while the one who is ruled by his necessary appetites is a thrifty oligarch? Is he saying all sexual appetites are unnecessary? I mean, you gotta continue the species. I'd say that's pretty necessary. Adeimantus, of course we did. Socrates, let's go back then and say how the democrat develops from the oligarch. It seems to me as if it mostly happens this way. Okay. Story time. Adeimantus, what way? Socrates, when a young man who is reared in the uneducated and thrifty manner we described just now tastes the honey of the drones and associates with wild and terrible creatures who can provide multifarious pleasures of every degree of complexity and sort, that probably marks the beginning of his transformation from having an oligarchic constitution within him to having a democratic one. Okay, so I think he's saying these rich guys aren't actually educated. All they care about is money. And then when he tastes the honey of the... So he's got all this money, and probably he's got some, like, friends who come by. He's like, dude, like, let's throw, like... You got all this money, let's throw some parties. And then he starts partying, and he's like, actually, this is kind of fun. So I think that's what's happening here. Okay, Adeimantus, it most certainly does. So, just as the city changed when one party received help from a like-minded alliance outside, doesn't the young man change in turn when external appetites of the same type and quality as it come to the aid of one of the parties within him? To the aid of one of the parties within him. Yeah, so it's like your friend who just wants to smoke weed and party with you. It's just like the external alliance overthrowing the oligarchy. Adeimantus, absolutely. Socrates, and if I suppose a counter-alliance comes to the aid of the oligarchic party within him, whether from his father or from the rest of his family who exhort and reproach him, then there is a faction and an opposing faction within him, and he battles against himself. Oh no! Do I hang out with my cool friend, or do I respect my father? just don't know what to do. Adeimantus, of course, Socrates. And sometimes, I suppose, the Democratic Party yields to the oligarchic. Some of its appetites are overcome while others are expelled, and a kind of shame rises in the young man's soul, and order is restored. Okay, so it's... Yeah, okay, there's this ongoing struggle. So he's like, I'm going to go hang out with my cool friend Fred. And he's like, no, I should listen to my dad. And it's like, he kind of goes back and forth. So that's the Democratic Party, your cool friend Fred, sometimes yields to dad. Adeimantus, that does sometimes happen. Socrates. Moreover, I suppose, as some appetites are expelled, others akin to them are being nurtured undetected because of the father's ignorance of upbringing and become numerous and strong. Yeah, okay. So dad knows about some things that you do, but like you got your secret weed stash under your mattress, and he doesn't know about that. Adeimantus. At any rate, that's what usually happens. Socrates. Then these desires draw him back to his old associates. Yeah, they do. And in secret intercourse, breed a multitude of others. Mm-hmm. It's because your dad's at work all the time. He's not paying attention at home. Adeimantus, of course. Socrates. Finally, I suppose, they seize the citadel of the young man's soul, since they realize that it is empty of the fine studies and practices and the true arguments that are the best watchmen and guardians in the minds of men loved by the gods. The citadel of the young man's soul. What a great image. By far the best, says Adeimantus. Socrates. Then I suppose beliefs and arguments are lying impostors rush up and occupy the same part of him in place of the others. Okay, so it's the appetites, or these desires seize the citadel, because there are no fine studies. It's like, yeah, you didn't spend any time studying music or art, and so all you want to do is party, and that becomes who you really are. And then you kind of have all these fake beliefs and arguments show up, I guess. Okay. They do indeed. Socrates. Won't he then return to those lotus eaters and live with them openly? Ah, the lotus eaters! I remember these. Aren't there lotus eaters in the Odyssey? I think they're just like smoking weed or is it like a hallucinogenic or something? Maybe they're like doing mushrooms out in the desert. I forgot. We'll see here. And if any help should come to the thrifty part of his soul from his relatives, don't those impostor arguments, having barred the gates of the royal wall within him, prevent the allied force itself from entering and even refusing to admit arguments of older private individuals as ambassadors? Isn't that a cool image? Just like here in the citadel of his soul, the gates of the royal wall within him. Proving stronger in the battle, won't they call reverence foolishness and drive it out as a dishonored fugitive? And calling temperance cowardliness, won't they shower it with abuse and banish it? As for moderate and orderly expenditure, won't they persuade him that it is boorish and illiberal, and join with a multitude of useless appetites to drive it over the border? Get out of here, reverence and temperance and orderly expenditure. You're not welcome here. You're a darn sucker. We like to party. Adeimantus, they will indeed. Socrates. And when they have somehow emptied and purged these from the soul of the one they are seizing hold of and initiating with solemn rites, they then immediately proceed to return arrogance, anarchy, extravagance, and shamelessness from exile in a blaze of torchlight, accompanied with a vast chorus of followers and crowned with garlands. Look at all this imagery. This is great. They praise them and give them fine names, calling arrogance good breeding, anarchy freedom, extravagance magnificence, and shamelessness courage. Isn't it in such some way as this that a young person exchanges an upbringing among necessary appetites for the freeing and release of useless and unnecessary pleasures? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm a liberated person. I don't need all this stuff that you are telling me what to do, Dad. You're such a square. Okay. Yeah, so we like arrogance, anarchy, extravagance, and shamelessness. I believe it. Adeimantus. Yes, that's clearly the way it happens. Socrates. Then, in his subsequent life, I suppose, someone like that spends no less money, effort, and time on the necessary pleasures than on the unnecessary pleasures. But, if he is lucky, and does not go beyond the limits in his Bacchic frenzy, and if, as a result of his growing somewhat older, the great tumult within him passes, he welcomes back some of the exiles and ceases to surrender himself completely to the newcomers. Then, putting all his pleasures on an equal footing, he lives, always surrendering rule over himself to whichever desire comes along, as if it were chosen by lot, until it is satisfied. And after that to another, dishonoring none, but satisfying all equally. Okay, so he's like, at first he's like, I don't need any of this necessary pleasure stuff. I'm just here to party, party, party. No bread, eating Rice Krispie treats whenever I want, and yeah, hanging out with my boy Fred here. We're having fun. It's like Entourage. And eventually he gets a little older. He's like, oh yeah, maybe that's not the best. So I'll have some bread sometimes, I guess, when I feel like it. But I'm still gonna party. But I'll try to like balance partying with doing all this necessary stuff. He does indeed. Socrates. And he does not accept or admit true argument into the guardhouse if someone tells him that some pleasures belong to fine and good appetites and others to bad ones, and that he must practice and honor the former and restrain and enslave the latter. On the contrary, he denies all this and declares that they are all alike and must be honored on an equal basis. Adeimantus, that's exactly what he feels and does. Socrates. And so he lives from day to day, gratifying the appetite of the moment. Sometimes he drinks heavily while listening to the flute, while at others he drinks only water and is on a diet. Sometimes he goes in for physical training, while there are others when he is idle. Well, there are others when he is idle and neglects everything. Oh, other times when he's idle and neglects everything. It's like, yeah, I go to the gym sometimes, work out when I feel like it. You know, a little of this, a little of that. Smoke a little bit, lift a little. Sometimes he spends his time engaged in what he takes to be philosophy. This isn't true philosophy. Often, though, he takes part in politics, leaping to his feet and saying and doing whatever happens to come into his mind. If he admires some military men, that is the direction in which he is carried. If some money makers, then in that different one. There is neither order nor necessity in his life, yet he calls it pleasant, free, and blessedly happy, and follows it throughout his entire life. Huh. Okay, so yeah, he kind of is like hopping around careers too. He's like, yeah, I could do this, I could do that. Maybe I'll go to law school. I don't know what else to do. Adeimantus, you have perfectly described the life of a man devoted to legal equality. Whew. Socrates, I certainly think he is a multifarious man and full of all sorts of characters, beautiful and complex, like the democratic city. Many men and women would envy his life because of the great number of examples of constitutions and characters it contains with it. So this is kind of the most interesting person. Like, he's tried everything. He's like, oh yeah, I was like a ship's captain down in South America for a couple years, and then, I was like up in Alaska for a while, and then I was like in Uzbekistan and doing this and that, just like partying when I felt like it. Like I tried to stay in shape, and everybody else is like, wow, you're really interesting. You got a lot going on, democratic man. Adeimantus, yes, that's right. Well, then, will we set this man alongside the democracy as the one who would rightly be called democratic? We will. Okay, so we now have 4 pieces of the ladder. So we went from the oligarchy, and that descended to democracy. On the political side, it's because they just like, all the poor people got mad. They're like, these rich people are just fat and lazy. All we have to do is take their stuff. And so they do. And they're like, yeah, freedom. Everybody gets a vote. Everybody can do whatever they want. Screw the draft. Power to the people. And then on the personal side, the democratic man is like, yeah, I grew up with this money-loving dad. And then I started spending some of that money with like my cool friends and started partying. And I loved it. And even when Dad found out, he didn't find out everything. So I kind of like became a little bit of a degenerate. But then as I got older, I like slowed down the partying a little bit. And now I'm like the cool guy. I'm the guy who like partied in my 20s, had a great time, can value a great time. But like I pump the brakes a little bit, and I try to be healthier now. Like, not drinking as much. I'm like trying to work out. Like I go for a run occasionally, and just do whatever I want, or switch jobs when I feel like it. And I definitely have the coolest stories of anybody in the room. You got like the timocratic man and the oligarchic man and the aristocrat man. Like I'm the person people want to hang out with. So yeah, this is still a lot of fun. Okay, so yeah, we got the first four, and the last one is the tyrant. The finest constitution and finest man remain for us to discuss: the tyranny and the tyrant. Finest, isn't that interesting? This tyranny has kind of a bad name. Well, I'm not sure what he means by fine. Adeimantus, absolutely. Socrates, come on then, tell me, my dear comrade, how does tyranny come to exist? That it evolves from democracy, you see, is fairly clear. It is clear. So, isn't the way democracy evolves from oligarchy much the same as that in which tyranny evolves from democracy? Okay, so we had the people overthrowing the oligarchy, and now tyranny's going to overthrow the people somehow. How do you mean? Socrates, the good they proposed for themselves, and because of which oligarchy was established, was wealth, wasn't it? Oh yeah, like, the people mainly just want to take the rich people's money. They weren't like, oh, they're not virtuous enough, we want to establish an empire of virtue. Adeimantus, yes. Socrates, and its insatiable desire for wealth and its neglect of other things for the sake of money-making was what destroyed it. Adeimantus, true. So isn't democracy's insatiable desire for what it defines as the good also what destroys it? Let's see. Adeimantus, what do you think it does define as the good? Now, the good, remember, had a very prominent role in Book 7. That's like the sunshine outside the cave that illuminates everything. Like, all intelligible concepts are illuminated by the good. At least from the philosopher's perspective. In a democracy, I don't know what they believe is good. Socrates, freedom. Can't argue with that. For surely, in a democratic city, that is what you would hear described as its finest possession, and is what makes it the only place worth living in for someone who is naturally free. Don't you hear that all the time? We believe in freedom. That's what it's all about. Adeimantus, yes, you often hear that said. Socrates, as I was about to say then, isn't it the insatiable desire for this good and the neglect of other things that changes this constitution and prepares it to need a dictatorship? They have too much freedom. Adeimantus, how does it do that? Socrates, I suppose it is when a democratic city, athirst for freedom, happens to get bad cupbearers for its leaders and gets drunk by drinking more than it should of unmixed wine. Then, if the rulers are not very gentle and do not provide plenty of freedom, it punishes them and accuses them of being filthy oligarchs. You darn filthy oligarch. So wait, what happens exactly? So they get bad leaders, and then if they don't get enough freedom, they're just whine all the time. So I'm thinking of like, I don't know, maybe 1880s. You had all these completely forgettable presidents of the United States, and I guess the presidents are like, yeah, whatever, have some freedom, I don't care, because I don't want to be accused of being an oligarch. Adeimantus, yes, that is what it does. Socrates, it showers with abuse those who obey the rulers as voluntary slaves and non-entities. Both in public and private, it praises and honors rulers who are like subjects and subjects who are like rulers. And isn't it inevitable in such a city that freedom should spread everywhere? Adeimantus, of course. Yes, my friend, and so it is bound to make its way into private households until finally it breeds anarchy among the very animals? What? This is crazy. Like they don't value discipline in any way, so even the animals are just let loose. Like, whatever, it's democracy. Adeimantus, what do you mean by that? Yeah, I guess there's no, like, spaying and neutering laws. Socrates, for instance, a father gets into the habit of behaving like a child and fearing his son, and the son gets into the habit of behaving like a father, feeling neither shame nor fear in front of his parents, all in order to be free. Yeah, we don't believe in disciplining little Timmy. A resident alien feels himself equal to a citizen and a citizen to him, and a foreigner likewise. Adeimantus, yes, those sorts of things do happen. Socrates, they do. And so do other little things of the same sort. I love this little emphasis on little things. It's sort of like the broken windows theory. A teacher, in such circumstances, is afraid of his students and flatters them, while the students belittle their teachers and do the same to their tutors, too. In general, the young are the spitting images of their elders and compete with them in words and deeds, while the old stoop to the level of the young and are full of wit and indulgence, imitating the young for fear of being thought disagreeable and masterful. Isn't this interesting? Haven't you had professors that are like trying to make jokes and be cool and fit in and be liked? And then the older school professors are just like, no, I don't make jokes. You're here to learn. You're here to do what I say. I'm not the cool dad here at all. Wow, this just seems so timeless to me. Adeimantus, absolutely. Socrates, the ultimate freedom for the majority, my friend, comes about in such a city, when males and females bought as slaves are no less free than those who bought them. Then there is the case of women in relation to men, and men to women, and the extent of their legal equality and freedom. We almost forgot to mention that. Okay. So, yeah, we did have Socrates the radical feminist in book 4 or something, book 5. And this is also in the Democracy. Men and women are the same. Adeimantus, are we not, with Aeschylus, going to say whatever it was came to our lips just now? What? We no longer possess the play from which this fragment comes. Oh, man. Certainly, says Socrates. At any rate, I am going to say it. I mean, no one who had not experienced it would believe how much freer domestic animals are here than in any other city. Okay, so now he's relating it back to real experience, saying, like, yeah, these animals in Athens have total freedom. And it's all because of democracy. Like, the democratic spirit just permeates everything. Bitches follow the proverb exactly and become like their mistresses. Horses and donkeys are in the habit of proceeding with complete freedom and dignity, bumping into anyone they meet on the road who does not get out of their way. And everything else is full of freedom, too. Adeimantus, it is my own dream you are telling me. That often happens to me when I go to the country. Okay, I'll check out this footnote. Maybe he'll have a reference here. It's my own dream you're telling me. Okay, you're tell me something I don't know, kid. Socrates, summing up all these things together, then, do you notice how sensitive they make the citizens' souls, so that if anyone tries to impose the least degree of slavery, they get irritated and cannot bear it? It's like any kind of law. You're like, no, don't take away my freedom, you darn tyrant. I don't want your Obamacare. In the end, as I am sure you are aware, they take no notice of the laws, written or unwritten, in order to avoid having any master at all. Yeah, there's like, I'm not actually going to study the law. I don't want anything to do with it. I just want to do what I want when I want. Adeimantus, I certainly am aware. Socrates, this, my friend, is the fine and impetuous beginning from which tyranny seems to me to grow. Now we're getting to it. Okay, we got a complete description of the democracy. Now how is it going to devolve into tyranny? It is certainly impetuous, says Adeimantus. But what comes next? Socrates, the same disease that developed in oligarchy and destroyed it also develops here, only more widespread and virulent because of the general permissiveness, and eventually enslaves democracy. In fact, excessive action in one direction usually sets up great reaction in the opposite direction. This happens in seasons, in plants, in bodies, and particularly in constitutions. Okay, so are there going to be some jealous people or what? Because it's supposed to be the same disease. Adeimantus, that's probably right. Socrates, for extreme freedom probably cannot lead to anything but a change to extreme slavery, whether in a private individual or a city. Whoa. Isn't that interesting? It's like 1984. Adeimantus, no, it probably can't. Socrates, tyranny probably does not evolve from any constitution other than democracy. The most severe and cruel slavery evolving from what I suppose is the most eminent degree of freedom. Whoa. This should give you the chills. Yes, that's reasonable. Socrates. But I think you are asking not that, but rather what sort of disease develops both an oligarchy and democracy alike and enslaves the latter. That's true. Well then, I meant that class of idle and extravagant men, with the bravest as leaders and the more cowardly as followers. We compare them to drones, the leaders to drones with stings, the followers to stingless ones. Rightly so. Socrates. These two cause problems in any constitution in which they arise, like phlegm and bile in the body. And it is against them that the good doctor and lawgiver of a city must take no less advanced precaution than a wise beekeeper. He should preferably prevent them from arising at all. But if they should happen to arise, he must cut them out, cells and all, as quickly as possible. Okay, so the two things here, yeah, these two are the two types of drones, which are, okay, so it's the idle and extravagant men, and then the two of them are like the leaders and the followers in among the idle and extravagant. Okay, so we got to get rid of idleness and extravagance if we're going to be wise beekeepers. Okay, yes, by Zeus, and as thoroughly as possible. Socrates. Then let's take up the question in this way in order to see what we want more distinctly. In what way? Let's end our discussion. Divide a democratic city into 3 parts, which is also how it is actually divided. One part is surely this class of drones, which, because of the general permissiveness, grows in it no less than an oligarchy. So I think in oligarchy the drones were different. They were like either beggars or like temple robbers, and now they're idle and extravagant. Like, I guess they were idle in the oligarchy, but they weren't extravagant because they didn't have any money. But in this one they do. Adimantus, so it does. But it is much fiercer in it than in the other. How so? There, because it is not honored but is excluded from the ranks of the rulers, so I guess in the oligarchy, it does not get any exercise and does not become vigorous. Okay, so yeah, these beggars and temple robbers aren't actually honored by anyone. However, in a democracy with few exceptions, it is surely the dominant class. Its fiercest part does all the talking and acting, while the other one settles near the speaker's platform. It buzzes and does not tolerate any dissent. Yeah, we're going to party. I don't care if you like it or not. As a result, this class is in charge of everything in such a constitution, with a few exceptions. That's right. Then, there is a second distinct class that is constantly emerging from the majority. Okay, a second distinct class. Okay, because he's talking about the 3 classes in the democracy. Which one? Surely, when everyone is trying to make money, the ones who are by nature most orderly generally become the wealthiest. Okay, so you got the idle and extravagant ones, and then you got the money makers, and then we'll see what the third one is. Adimantus, probably so. Then, that is where the most plentiful honey for the drones exist, I take it, and the easiest for them to extract. Okay, so these idle and extravagant guys are always just trying to they just want a little cut, just a little piece of that pie. Adimantus, how could anyone extract it from those who have very little? I suppose then that these rich people, as they are called, are fodder for the drones. Yeah. Sorry, rich guy, we're going to be taking that. Pretty much. The people, those who work their own land, take no part in politics, or own few possessions, would be the third class. This is the large and most powerful class in a democracy when it meets in assembly. Okay, you got like these yeoman farmers making an honest living, and yeah, they're not political, but when they have like the country assembly, like, I don't know, Jimmy Stewart gets up to talk in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, then they're very powerful. Adimantus, yes it is, but it is not willing to meet often if it does not get a share of the honey. Yeah, they want some of that honey too. So, it always does get a share, one that allows the leaders in taking the wealth of the rich and distributing it to the people to keep the greatest share for themselves. Okay, so I guess it's the rich. Everybody wants the rich's honey, and so I guess they're going to kind of redistribute it so that the idle and extravagant people get some, and then the people who are actually doing work get some, who are not wealthy. Adimantus, yes, that is the sort of share they get. Socrates, then, I suppose that those whose wealth is taken away are compelled to defend themselves by speaking in the popular assembly and doing whatever else they can. Adeimantus, of course. Okay, so the wealthy people have to go to the assembly and say, oh, whoa, don't soak the rich here, man. I'm just making an honest living here, too. Socrates, at which point, even if they have no appetite for revolution at all, they get accused by the others of plotting against the people and of being oligarchs. Darn rich person plotting against us? Adeimantus, they do. Finally, when they see the people, not intentionally, but through misapprehension and being misled by the accusers trying to do injustice to them, then, whether they wish it or not, they really do become oligarchs. Not from choice, though, but because the drone, by stinging them, engenders this evil. Okay, so you're a rich guy, and everybody wants some of your honey, and you go to the assembly, you're like, whoa, stop taking this. I'm making money for myself. I'm doing this honestly. And they're like, no, you got to give us money. So he's like, all right, well, screw you. Maybe I will become an oligarch. And you guys are just trying to take my stuff. I gotta defend what's mine. I'm gonna contribute, set up a super PAC and give money to congressmen that are on my side. And then they're like, hey, now you actually are an oligarch. Get money out of politics. But yeah, so Socrates is saying it's the drone's fault. It's like these extravagant idle people's fault. Okay, Adeimantus. And so I guess this is kind of the reaction. So you remember with the kid who's like, oh, okay, he's hanging out with his cool friend, but then sometimes his dad gets a little power back. And so it's this back and forth between democracy and oligarchy. So now this is kind of swinging back toward oligarchy. Adeimantus, absolutely. Then there are impeachments, judgments, and trials on both sides. Right. And don't the people always tend to set up one man as their special leader, nurturing him and making him great? Yes, they do. And it is clear that when a tyrant arises, the position of popular leader is the sole root from which he springs. Ah. Adeimantus, it is. What is the beginning, then, of the transformation from popular leader to tyrant? Isn't it clear that it happens when the popular leader begins to behave like the character in the story told about the temple of the Lycaean Zeus in Arcadia? What story is that? That whoever tastes the one piece of human innards cut up with those of all the other sacrificial victims inevitably becomes a wolf. Haven't you heard that story? Haven't you? I have. Isn't it the same, then, with a popular leader? Once he really takes over a docile mob, he does not restrain himself from shedding a fellow citizen's blood. Yep. But by leveling the usual false charges and bringing people into court, he commits murder. And by blotting out a man's life, his impious tongue and lips taste kindred blood. Then he banishes and kills and drops hints about the cancellation of debt and the redistribution of land. Hooray! And after that, isn't such a man inevitably fated either to be killed by his enemies or to be a tyrant transformed from a man into a wolf? Okay, so you got this popular leader, and then he's has these trumped up political charges against his enemies and basically murders them. And then he's like, oh yeah, and pretty soon I'm going to be canceling all your debts and redistributing the land. And then either the rich people have him killed or he becomes a true tyrant. Okay, so this is like your, your Che Guevara rising up. Okay, yeah, this popular revolution, redistributing the property. And either things are not going to end well for him or we get tyranny. Adeimantus. Yes, that is the inevitable outcome. He is the one, then, who stirs up faction against the rich. He is. Oh, man, this is great. This is just like Central American revolutionaries. Socrates. And if he happens to be exiled, but, despite his enemies, manages to return, doesn't he come back as a full-fledged tyrant? Obviously. And if they are unable to expel him or put him to death by accusing him before the city, they plot a violent death for him by covert means. Isn't that interesting? A violent death by covert means for our radical land redistributing revolutionary. Huh. Wonder if that reminds you of anything. Adeimantus. That's what tends to happen anyway. Socrates. And everyone who has reached this stage soon discovers the famous tyrannical request to ask the people to give him a bodyguard to keep their popular leader safe for them. Give him a bodyguard. give him a bodyguard. Adeimantus, right. Socrates, and the people give it to him, I suppose, fearing for his safety, but confident of their own. Adeimantus, right. So, when a wealthy man sees this and is charged with being an enemy of the people because of his wealth, then, comrade, in the words of the oracle to Croesus, the richest guy ever, he flees without delay to the banks of the many-pebbled Hermus, and is not ashamed at all of his cowardice. Okay, so, yeah, the wealthy man is just like, I'm getting out of here. We got this really popular guy who's, throwing people in jail, and he's got his own bodyguard. This ain't gonna end well for the rich person. See y'all later. It's like in Godfather 2? They're all leaving Miami, time to go, bro. No shame in this. Get out of Havana. Adeimantus, he would certainly never get a second chance to be ashamed. Socrates, if he is caught, I imagine he is put to death, inevitably. As for this popular leader of ours, he clearly does not lie on the ground mighty in his might. But, having brought down all those others, he stands in the chariot of the city as a complete tyrant instead of a popular leader. That's for sure. Whew. Shall we next describe the happiness of this man and of the city in which such a creature arises? Okay, so now now we got to talk about tyrannical man. Adeimantus. Yes, let's. Socrates. To start with, in the early days of his reign, won't he greet everyone he meets with a smile, deny he is a tyrant, promise all sorts of things in public and private, free the people from debt, redistribute the land to them and to his followers, and pretend to be gracious and gentle to all? Inevitably, hey, I'm just a friendly guy. How you doing? Yeah, I'll just get rid of all your debt. I'll just give you some land. Everybody loves me. Inevitably, but once he has dealt with his exiled enemies, by making peace with some and destroying others, and all is calm on that front, his primary concern, I imagine, is to be constantly stirring up some war or other so that people will need a leader. Ah, okay. A little wag the dog right here. It's like, okay, I've kind of solved everything, but now I need an enemy, so people keep needing me, because once I've redistributed everything, why do they need me anymore? Very likely. And also, wouldn't you say, so that impoverished by war taxes, they will be forced to concentrate on their daily needs and be less likely to plot against them. Ah, so he's got to impoverish the people to keep them busy. Yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You promise everything, and you're like, oh, well, we got to fight this war, so I got to make you all poor, and now you don't even have time to plot against me. Clearly. And in addition, I suppose, so that if there are some free-thinking people he suspects of rejecting his rule, he can find pretext for putting them at the mercy of the enemy and destroying them. For all these reasons, isn't a tyrant bound to be always stirring up war? Whew. So fascinating. Adeimantus, he is. Don't all these actions tend to make him more hateful to the citizens? Of course. And don't some of those who helped establish his tyranny and hold positions of power within it, the ones who are bravest, speak freely to him and to each other, criticizing what is happening? Adeimantus, probably. Then, the tyrant will have to do away with all of them if he intends to rule. Oh, a little Stalinist purge, until he's left with no friend or enemy who is worth anything at all. Obviously, he will have to keep a sharp lookout, then, for anyone who is brave, magnanimous, wise, or rich. He is so happy, you see, that he is forced, whether he wants to or not, to be their enemy and plot against all of them until he has purged the city. Yeah, fine purge that is. Socrates, yes. The opposite of the one doctors perform on our bodies. They draw off the worst and leave the best, whereas he does just the opposite. Oh, man. So interesting. Yeah, we got to get rid of all these generals. Because there are all these brave, magnanimous, wise, and rich people. You got it. Time to go. Pol Pot style. Adeimantus. Yes, that's what he has to do, it seems, if he is to rule. Socrates. It is a blessedly happy necessity he is bound by, then, which requires him to live with inferior masses even though hated by them, or not live at all. Okay, so it's like, you're a popular guy, you're promising everybody everything, then you're like, to stay in power, you're like, I really need to stir up some war here, and then you're making everybody poor, and then all the people around you are like, hey, I thought you were supposed to be redistributing this money to the people, and he's like, hey, shut up, I'm in charge here, and then they keep kind of whining and making him look bad, so he has to kill all of them, and then all he has left are these, like, the masses, and he's got no friends. So Socrates is saying that, like, that's kind of a just outcome, because that guy deserves it. He's just all alone in his palace. Okay, Adimantus it is. And the more he makes the citizens hate him. By doing those things, the larger and more trustworthy a bodyguard he will need, won't he? Yeah, gonna need a big old bodyguard, bud. Adimantus, of course. And who will these trustworthy people be? Yeah, I guess this is sort of like, I don't know. This kind of starting to remind me of like the Roman Empire, where you got the emperors sort of doing similar things, like doing these purges, killing a bunch of patricians, and then they have to like build up the Praetorian Guard because they're afraid for their life all the time, and then the Praetorian Guard ends up killing them. So I think the tyrant's going to be killed by his bodyguard. That's my prediction. Okay, who will these trustworthy people be, and from where will he get them? Adimantus. Lots of them will come swarming of their own accord if he pays them. Socrates. Drones again by the dog. What does by the dog mean? By the dog. See note. Not going to do that. Okay, that is what I think you were talking about. Foreign multifarious ones. Okay, so it's like there aren't any good people left here in the tyranny, so he's got to get like these mercenaries. Adimantus, yes, you are right. What about the domestic ones? Wouldn't he be willing to deprive citizens of their slaves somehow, set them free, and enlist them in his bodyguard? He certainly would, says Adimantus, since they are the ones he can trust the most. What a blessedly happy thing this tyrant business is, on your view, if these are the sorts of friends and trusted men he must employ after destroying his former ones. Alright, Adimantus, nonetheless, they are the sorts he does employ. And these friends and new citizens admire and associate with him, whereas the good ones hate him and avoid him. Okay, so yeah. So he just like frees a bunch of people, like, oh, hey, you slave, come be my bodyguard. And the slave's like, all right, cool, that beats what I'm doing now. You're the best. And then everybody else in the city is like, this guy's terrible. Adimantus, of course. It is no wonder then that tragedy seems to be something wholly wise, or that Euripides is outstanding in it. What is he talking about? Why is that? Because, among other things, he expressed the following shrewd thought. Tyrants are wise by associating with the wise. He meant evidently that these associates of a tyrant are the wise ones. Yeah, like, that's the only way to be safe, is to be close to the tyrant after he's already done his big purge. Adimantus, yes, and he also praises tyranny as godlike, and lots of other things besides. And the other poets do too. Socrates. Then surely, since the tragic poets are so wise, they will forgive us and those with constitutions like ours if we do not admit them into our city, since they hymn the praises of tyranny. Okay. So they will forgive us if we do not admit them in our city. Okay, so I think we're not letting the tragic poets into the city. Okay, I guess. For my part, I think they will forgive us, the more refined of them anyway. Socrates. They can go around to all the other cities instead, I suppose, drawing large crowds and hiring actors with fine, loud, persuasive voices, and lead their constitutions to become tyrannies and democracies. Oh, what? So he's kind of railing against these poets here again. Like, Socrates has not been a big fan of poets from the beginning, except insofar as they're useful for perpetuating mythologies. Okay. So, tragedy seems to be something wholly wise. The wise person associates with tyrants. And then the tragic poets are so wise, they'll forgive us if we do not... Okay, we're like... In our city, I think that's the original ideal one, not this tyranny that he's talking about. Because he says they'll eventually lead the constitutions to become tyrannies and democracies. So it's like, okay, these guys are the real enemies, these tragic poets. Like, I don't know how it really gets there, because he said was leading to oligarchy first, but they're praising tyranny, and so we don't like them. All right, Adimantus, yes indeed. What's more, they are paid and honored for it, primarily, as one might expect, by tyrants, and secondly, by democracy. But the higher they go on the ascending scale of constitutions, the more their honor diminishes, as if unable to proceed for lack of breath. Okay, so it's like I think like tyrants love these tragic poets because they make them out to be good. Yeah, let's commission some more state-sponsored movies that make me look awesome as a tyrant. And I guess in the democracy, like everybody likes a good story, so they're just allowed there too. And then yeah, on ascending the scale. So maybe this ascending scale. I don't know which way it goes. If it's aristocracy at the top and tyranny at the bottom, or the other way in Socrates' mind. But they keep losing their honor as they're running up, I guess, toward tyranny. Okay, Adimantus, absolutely. Socrates, but all that is a digression. Just whenever he thinks of poets, he has to rail against them a little bit. Let's return to our tyrant's camp, the one that is beautiful, populous, complex, and never the same, and ask how he is going to maintain it. So the camp, I don't know if that's like the army. Adimantus, if there are sacred treasuries in the city, he will obviously use them for as long as they last, as well as the property of those he has destroyed, so the taxes he will require from the people will be smaller. Okay, so the tyrant's like, alright, I've already taxed you guys a lot. I guess I'll just raid the treasury now. What about when these resources give out? Asks Socrates. Clearly, says Adimantus, his father's estate will have to support him, his drinking companions, and his boyfriends and girlfriends, too. Okay, so this... I guess the tyrant likes to party as well. He's just like, well, time to ask Dad for a loan. Socrates, I understand. You mean the people who fathered the tyrant will have to support him and his friends. Wait, are we talking about the person? No. Okay, we're still talking about the literal tyrant, not the tyrannical character, like the great-grandson of the aristocrat. Adimantus, they will have no choice. Socrates, what if the people get irritated and say it is not just for a grown-up son to be supported by his father? Yeah. Be your own man, tyrant. On the contrary, the father should be supported by his son. They did not father him and establish him in power, they say, so that when he had become strong they would be enslaved to their own slave and have to support him, his slaves, and other assorted rabble as well, but so that, with him as their popular leader, they would get free from the rule of the rich and the so-called fine and good people in the city. At that point, they ordered him and his friends to leave the city as a father might drive his son and his troublesome drinking companions from his house. What do you think would happen then? So they're getting rid of the tyrant, I guess? Because the tyrant is taking money from his father? I don't know. Adimantus. Then by Zeus, the people will soon learn what kind of creature they have fathered, welcomed, and made strong, and that is a case of the weaker trying to drive out the stronger. Socrates. What do you mean? Will the tyrant dare to use force against his father or hit him if he does not obey? Okay, so I guess the father is the people here. Yeah, the people who fathered the tyrant, not his literal father. I was a little confused by that. Okay, so it's like he runs out of treasury, and then he's like, okay, people, I need some of that money back. You know that money I gave you? Like I redistributed the land. I'm gonna need some of that back for me and to support my bodyguard here and my boyfriends and girlfriends. They're like, hold on, why are you I thought it was power to the people. Now you're taxing us, the people. Get out of here. You and your drinking companions are not welcome. Okay, so is he going to actually use force against the people? Adimantus, yes, once he has taken his weapons. Once he has taken away his weapons. Okay, Socrates. A tyrant is a parasite as you describe him, then, and a harsh nurse of old age. So a parasite is someone who kills their father. And we do now seem to have an acknowledged tyranny. And so the people, by trying to avoid the proverbial frying pan of enslavement to free men, have fallen into the fire of having slaves as their masters. And, in exchange for the excessive and inappropriate freedom they had before, they have put upon themselves the harshest and most bitter slavery to slaves. Okay, so they didn't want to be enslaved by the free men. So they're like, yeah, those darn rich people, you're getting too much money. We have a popular leader now, and he's going to take your money, and then we'll all be free. And then the tyrant is like, no, I'm going to need some of that money back. And yeah, they're like, wait, now we're a slave to the slaves, I guess. Adimantus, that's exactly what happens. Socrates, well then, wouldn't we be justified in saying that we have adequately described how tyranny evolves from democracy and what it is like once it has come to exist? Adeimantus, we would. Our description was entirely accurate. Wow, well done. What a journey. So we're almost to the end here. We haven't actually described the tyrannical soul. So in this chapter, or this part, we did the democracy. We saw how the democracy was getting rid of the oligarchy, because they're like, it was all the poor people getting together and be like, hey, let's just kill these rich people and then put the people in charge. And then Socrates has this really long description of like freedom in the democratic society. So they love freedom more than anything. And it's at all levels. Like, students don't respect like their teachers, dogs don't respect their masters, and anytime there's any kind of rule imposed that threatens freedom, people like almost revolt. So they're just so jealous of their own freedom. And then he says that this democracy has three parts. So you've got this idle and extravagant class of, I don't know if these guys are like rounders or they're all described as the drones again, that just kind of need to take some honey from the money makers who are actually doing work. So that's the second class. And then the third class, you have these farmers out in the country, and they are just like doing some honest work. They don't like politics, but they're sort of the most, I guess in some ways they're the most persuasive people. They have the most power in the assembly, because they're just like, hey, I'm just an honest farmer. Here's what I think should happen. So you got these three guys, and then what happens is these idle and extravagant guys start being like, hey, let's take some of this money, or like, we need some money from the rich people. And the rich people are like, whoa, don't take my money. So the rich people have to defend themselves in the assembly. I think the assembly is kind of where all the action takes place in this democracy. And while they're doing that, they're like, get mad at the idle and extravagant people. I mean, like, those darn guys are trying to take my money. I need to like use other measures to protect myself. And then he says they actually start to become oligarchs. So the pendulum swings back to oligarchy, and then these idle and extravagant people, they're used to freedom now. So in the oligarchy, they didn't have any freedom. They were just like constantly oppressed by the oligarchs. But in the democracy, they have a lot more freedom. So they're like, oh, okay, well, let's start. They get a popular leader who starts saying, how bad the rich are and how he's going to make everything better, and intimating he's going to redistribute the land. He becomes more and more popular, and he's allowed to speak everywhere, because in an oligarchy he wouldn't be allowed to speak. And so he gets like this following, and eventually they kind of like throw out these rich people and take their money, and then like the tyrant is put into power, and like gets rid of the democracy. And then he's got a long description of this tyranny as well. So he's, I don't know, he has to start he's got to support his own power. So he starts some wars with foreigners, and then taxing the people. And so then they have to keep working, again, like maintain full employment, so that these guys aren't like questioning his authority or his power. They're just like, okay, we just have to work all the time, and that's how he keeps them poor, but then he's got to spend money on himself, and he's kind of supporting like a private luxurious lifestyle, I guess, because he's got to support his boyfriends and girlfriends. And then we got this comparison to the father, so he's like, oh, I need some money from dad, and dad in this case is the people. So then he goes back to the people and asks them for money, and then they get mad. They're like, hold up, why aren't we giving you money now? The whole reason we put you in charge was so we'd get more money, and now you want money back. And so they get rid of him. And then Socrates has this little digression on the tragic poets and how they praise tyranny, and how they're popular in both democracies and tyrannies, and I guess kind of lead to democracy and then ultimately to tyranny. So he's like, the real villain in all this is the tragic poet, once again. So Socrates just kind of rails against them for a little while, and then he comes back. He's like, oh, well, sorry, let's keep talking about tyranny. So then the tyrant has to build up his bodyguards a bit, and so he's getting these foreigners as bodyguards, and he's freeing some slaves to be his bodyguards. And also in the meantime, he'd done this big purge. So gotten rid of all of anybody who was smart, around him who tended to undermine his authority, he got rid of, which, yeah, seems to happen a lot in ancient and modern times in tyrannical systems. So it's really fascinating to read this description in light of, like, I don't know, various, like, communist revolutions of, like, oh, power to the people, and they're like, oh wait, all these people are threats, like, I gotta start killing people, and then ultimately are, like, I don't know, maybe driven for power or maybe stay in power, depending on the historical circumstances. And then, yeah, I guess he's driven I guess the people are not very happy about this, so we have, like, a final showdown between the people and this tyrant. And I guess I don't know who's gonna, like, win this showdown. But yeah, he's got to, like, get his weapons and either fight them or flee the city. And that's a wrap. So we still haven't described the tyrannical soul. I think that'll happen in the next book. But we've made it all the way down the ladder, or up the ladder, depending on your perspective. I really enjoyed this. It's kind of lighter fare because it's just this pure narrative structure without any... He's not actually looking, like, providing any historical examples. He's just like, yeah, this happens and this happens, and I think we can all agree this happens. And a lot of it seems, like, pretty plausible, that this is how human nature is going to kind of play out. And you could probably find plenty of historical examples for each of these transitions here. So it just, I don't know, it seems like a wise chapter. I don't know if it would, like, hold up to a political science analysis of, like, doing a regression of transitions between different types of government in the 20th century or whatever, but I enjoyed it. So, hope you enjoyed it as well. We are now finished with Book 8. We only have 2 books left. That's 2 videos per book, so 4 videos left. Get excited for them. Hit the notification button next to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the old like, and see you tomorrow.